afternoon, my name is Louise Sullivan and I am honoured to be presiding over the funeral of Mildred Young, much loved mother, grandmother, aunt and friend. Whilst there is sadness surrounding the passing of our local centenarian, today will be a true celebration of a life well lived. Mildred was born into a world without computers, where movies were silent and telephones had a rotary dial. Mildred lived through 2 world wars, 26 prime ministers, and lived to see her great-grandson Paul marry his partner George. Mildred's family tell me that she loved technology and she embraced change, and until recently used a mobile phone. And she loved talking to her great-grandchildren about the shows that they watched on their iPads when they visited her in the Freemasons nursing home. Although Mildred was 106 years of age at her death, the passing was unexpected. And no matter how often we say to ourselves that death is inevitable, it is always profoundly sad when we lose a loved one. Mildred is one of the last of her generation, and the loss of such a compassionate matriarch will be felt for many years to come. Mildred outlived 2 of her children, Samuel and Joan, and has been survived by her daughter Lola, her husband Jeff, their children Stephen and Elizabeth, and their children Jennifer, Paul, Lydia and Michael. Although Mildred outlived her brother Bruce and her sister Sylvia, there are many of her offspring here today. And on behalf of the Young and Tremaine family, your presence here is much appreciated. I would like to invite those gathered here today to attend Mildred's burial at the Golden Gate ceremony directly after this afternoon's service. A light afternoon tea will be served in the pavilion at the cemetery. Mildred will be buried next to her beloved husband George, who passed away 10 years ago. I now call upon Mildred's great-granddaughter Jennifer to read from the work of Dorothy Parker, who, like Mildred, was well known for her wit and her wisdom.
But Not Forgotten by Dorothy Parker. I think no matter where you stray, that I shall go with you away. Though you may wander sweeter lands, you will not soon forget my hands, nor yet the way I held my head, nor all the tremulous things I said. You still will see me, small and white, and smiling in the secret night, and feel my arms about you when the day comes fluttering back again. I think no matter where you be, you'll hold me in your memory, and keep my image there without me by telling later loves about me.
Thank you. The lovely words. I now call upon Mildred's great-grandson Paul to say some words about Mildred and what she meant to those mourning here today.
Firstly, I would like to thank everyone for honouring my great-grandmother, Grandma Millie, today. We are overwhelmed with the number of people who are here today and overjoyed with the garden flowers that you've brought here with you. The smell that permeates this chapel reminds me of the smell of Grandma Millie's house, which seemed to have a vase of fresh-cut flowers on every flat surface. Mildred was the youngest child born to Daisy and Gerald Young in 1912. She was their 5th child, but only the 3rd to live to adulthood. Gerald attempted to enlist in the army in 1914, but his country felt he would be more useful to the war effort working as an engineer. Like all families, the Young family felt the full effects of the war. The rationing that began in World War I and continued into World War II made those living through these times self-sufficient. Mildred would often tell stories of making clothes out of flour bags and redesigning hand-me-downs. Most houses had chooks and grew their own produce. Nothing went to waste. Mildred was an expert cook, preserver of food, and a seamstress. Most of her descendants here today have a jumper or socks made by my Grandma Millie. As if the First World War was not traumatic enough, Mildred had to wave her first her husband of 5 years, George, goodbye as he was taken by a boat to fight for his country in New Guinea. Mildred only had one child, Samuel, to keep her company at home, and sadly, young Sam did not live long enough to see the return of his father in January 1945. Mildred alone had to witness the homecoming of her once strong, handsome husband. The man who stepped off that ship was a shell of his former self. He was emaciated, diseased, and traumatized. George could not have a better wife, nurse, and confidant. Together they journeyed on the road to recovery, and by the time their daughter Lola was born in 1948 and Joan in 1950, Mildred and George were very much part of the community in Cygnet, Tasmania. George had a job working in the apple industry, and he and Mildred worked together to build their homes, which was surrounded by apple orchards and many farm pets. Mildred loved her dogs, goats, sheep, and later alpacas. She sold her first produce at the local market for 20 years. Her alpaca rugs won first prize at the Huonville show every year. I don't believe there is any truth in the rumour that the judging was biased, as her sister Sylvia was on the panel. George and Mildred created an idyllic and loving home for their surviving children, Lola and Joan. Her love of animals and cooking was passed on to her girls, and they too became strong matriarch figures in their own right. Mildred, George, and Lola were devastated when Joan passed away from cancer in 2002. Mildred moved in with Joan's widower, Sid, to assist him with Lyndall, Colin, and Rodney. She stayed there for 3 months until, she said, Sid's learnt to cook toast. Mildred was 70 years of age when she went back to study at the University of the Third Age. The experience gave her a thirst for knowledge, and she graduated from a Bachelor of Arts in 1989 at 77 years of age. It seemed that study had opened her up to the world beyond her local community, and for the next 15 years, Mildred became a traveller of the world. Sometimes she took George, and on other trips she took her girls. But the best of all was when she took all of us great-grandkids. I remember going to Disneyland with her and Jenny and Grandma Millie went on as many rides as we did. She had so much energy. In 2008, George left Mildred's side. His death was difficult for Mildred, but she was not one to stay in the past. Lola tells me that up until 3 days before Mildred died, she would kiss George's photo every morning and say, "Morning, Georgie." It was a surprise to Mildred that she lived for another 10 years after George's passing. She remained positive over this time, but she was ready to meet up with George again when her health started to decline in the last 3 years of her life. None of us can picture a life without Grandma Millie. When people find out how old she was, they often say quite correctly that she had a good innings and how lucky she was to have such a long life. While this is all correct, it does not take away the sadness we feel today. It does not fill the hole that we have in our hearts, and it does not bring back the sound of her sweet voice. We will miss you, Grandma Millie. We were so lucky to have you in our lives, and although over time our sadness will lessen, the memories of you will always remain.
Thank you, Paul, for that thoroughly interesting snapshot of Mildred's life. Mildred did indeed have an interesting life. I'm sure she will remain an inspiration for many for years to come. Now it is time to reflect on a life well lived of a deeply loved woman, Mildred Young. Whilst we see some photos of Mildred, we'll be listening to her favourite piece of music. Roberta Flack's "The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face." Upon Lola to read a prayer to her mother, Mildred.
Wonderful Mother by Patrick O'Reilly. God made a wonderful a mother who never grows old. He made her smile of the sunshine, and he moulded her heart of pure gold. In her eyes He placed bright, shining stars, and in her cheeks fair roses you see. God made a wonderful mother, and he gave that dear mother to me.
Thank you, Lola. Beautiful words. We now come to the end of the section of the service which is to take place in the chapel. After we leave the chapel, it is hoped you will join us to the gravesite. Once we have said our goodbyes to Mildred, we will all be invited to the pavilion for a bittersweet celebration with the family. I wish to impress on everyone here today how privileged you are to have had such an inspirational woman in your lives. She was intelligent, hard-working, generous and fun. All of you will have your own special memories of Mildred, and whilst many of us will never live past 100 years, we can all hope to live a life with such a purpose. On behalf of Lola and all of Mildred's descendants, thank you for your attendance today, and we hope you enjoy the last piece of music chosen by Mildred for this very occasion, The Four Seasons by Vivaldi, Winter. We are now at the burial site. We are gathered here to bid our final farewell to Mildred Young. The lowering of the coffin into the ground seems so final. The role that Mildred played in her earthly body is now over, but her influence on those she knew will continue. The way she lived her life and the legacy she has left will continue to be inspirational to us all. The love and memories that we have of Mildred will transcend death. Mildred was able to thrive in life partly because of the supportive community that surrounded her, and so too will this community support you to resume your own journey and to make new memories. We now come to the part in today's service where we commit Mildred's body into her final resting place. Into the darkness and warmth of the earth we lay you down. Into the sadness and smiles of our memories we lay you down. Into the cycle of living and dying and rising again we lay you down. May you rest in peace, in fulfillment and in loving. I now encourage those who would like to place a flower or memento on Mildred's coffin to do so now. Please take the time to reflect on what Mildred meant to you and how you will honour her spirit going forward. We have come to the end of today's tribute and the celebration of Mildred Grace Young. In the words of Carson McCullers, how can the dead be truly dead when they still live in the souls of those who are left behind? May you find comfort and strength in your memories, and may you find peace and healing in your hearts.